It is 4:20 somewhere. Thanks for joining us. We have Elizabeth Franklin Best, a federal appeals attorney. This is gonna be an interesting one. Let's get into it. Hey, Elizabeth. Elizabeth, can you tell us about yourself?
Sure. So I'm a criminal appellate lawyer in South Carolina. Got my own law firm. We represent primarily federal criminal defendants throughout the country. We pretty much handle cases on direct appeal. We do a lot of federal post conviction work. We do we do federal habeas cases for state convicted inmates,
Oh, that's
a
neat.
lot of compassionate release petitions these days. Really kind of our goal is once somebody's been convicted of a crime and they've been sentenced, it's our job to either reverse that sentence or to try to get their time reduced. And that's the space that we're in.
That's really cool. I've always, because I'm a lawyer and I've never done criminal law. Like I've been like a finance I found out what finance was in law school. And so I immediately became a stockbroker after I graduated from law school in 2008. Wrong timing, let me tell you. And I'd hear this about these habeas petitions, and I'm like, "What is that?" By the way, so when you say this as habeas, is it habeas corpus or what is a habeas petition?
Yeah, petition for habeas relief. So after let's just say somebody's been convicted in state court, they have an opportunity to challenge their conviction in their state sort of area, right? Their state court. But once they've exhausted that, they have an opportunity to ask the federal court to take a look at their conviction. Now, it's a really high standard. The federal courts have a lot of sort of deference towards state court convictions. But if you're someone who believes that you've been, incarcerated in violation of a federal principle or law, then you can ask the federal courts to get involved in your case and review your conviction. That's essentially what federal habeas is.
So, is that all part of the appeals process or is that separate? I'm just trying to understand. Again, this is why you go to lawyers because, like, I don't. So, I witnessed and actually witnessed the process. A friend of mine, Lance, he was a dispensary owner. He had several shops in the grow and finally got prosecuted. He's on the seventh year of a 10-year sentence, but I saw the appeals process as well.
Mm,
So they actually was heard, I think it was the ninth district, and it's
okay.
on YouTube. You can watch it.
Mhm.
But I was under the impression though that was his last chance. Like you can't do no more appeals, or is there like a one shot? Because it just again, the reason why is there was cannabis, why he was in prison. There was 100% no guns involved, no
Right.
pills, nothing. It was just he had a pot shop. That's what he got caught doing. And I was watching the attorney. If you watch it on YouTube, you, there's some like parts of the argument you're like, oh, why don't you just point this out or point this out? But the circuit judges at the end seemed very still single minded, and we're gonna prosecute this guy no matter what because he had a
Yeah, you got a couple interesting points there. First of all, you're right. When somebody's been convicted of crime, people have very little idea about what the appellate space looks like. Someone's been watching Law and Order, they've been watching cop shows their entire lives. Everybody knows what a trial is. They know what your Miranda warnings are. Everyone is comfortable
but
with
they
that,
don't know why you have a trial.
but they may not know why you
They
have.
don't know that it's to find the facts. They just that is interesting. You don't learn that until you get to law school.
No, and that's exactly right. But, it's not unusual for people to really just have no idea kind of what happened. Once somebody gets convicted, now what? What are your possible remedies? Like, how do you undo this? And
Yeah.
so it's a little bit different in every state, but I'll tell you the principles are sort of generally the same everywhere. So, like, once you've been convicted of a crime, and let's assume this is a state conviction. In the federal system, slightly different. So if it's a state conviction, you'll have an opportunity to file a direct appeal in your court, and they will review your case and they will decide it on the merits. They will
Hmm.
look to see if there have been any errors of law in your case. So that's the first step. Once you lose
But
that,
not fact.
most I'm sorry, what's that?
because the lay people, the people without the law degrees, that you're talking about an analysis to appeal a ruling of law, a legal matter, and not a factual matter. And so
Right.
somebody who's they got it wrong, they did the evidence wrong, it was the wrong facts. Like, how do you like educate the client regarding it's this is our
Mm.
scope of what we're able to do, but we aren't able to raise these types of arguments.
But when you get to the second step, right, after you lose your direct appeal, most states have what's called like a collateral challenge. And typically that's an opportunity to introduce new facts into the case. So you may have an
Mm.
allegation of ineffective assistance of trial counsel, prosecutorial misconduct, juror misconduct. If you've got your own experts who may have should have testified at your trial, this is the opportunity to
Uh-oh.
expand
Okay.
facts.
So you
Yeah.
can still challenge the facts.
You
Against
can in that collateral proceeding, right? So you can't do it on the
Mm.
direct appeal, but afterwards, most states have some way that you can challenge it. Sometimes they'll call it like state habeas. In South Carolina, they call it post-conviction relief. They call it like MARs in North Carolina, but most states have a way of doing that. And it's a really important part of challenging a
Mm.
conviction. I think a lot of people don't realize that it's there. They don't attach importance to it. But if you've been convicted, you need to start working on additional factual development in your case so that you can present it. And
But
then if you do that, then you can try to go into federal habeas. And up until this last term of court, in the United States Supreme Court, we did have some additional factual development at that point as well. But the Supreme Court has just sort of shut that down. We can't do that.
really? So was that because the Supreme Court is very lopsided. If anything is 2/3, in my opinion, that's lopsided. You got but
yeah.
right instance. So trying to take a liberal anything up to the Supreme Court right now. And we come from an industry riddled with social equity, which is a euphemism for affirmative action that dates back to a fairly famous case from about 2003, written by Sandra Day O'Connor, which I am really worried is going to be overruled this summer. And I think that the Biden debt is also gone, or the student loan forgiveness is going to be gone. But what happened
Yeah.
in this particular case from the Supreme Court, and how are the convicted's rights taken away from them by that ruling?
So this is like really kind of wonky federal habeas stuff. But just here's the long and short of it. Back in 2012, the Supreme Court said, you know what? If the reason why you did not present your claim, your winning claim to a federal habeas court is because you got ineffective assistance of counsel during this first like collateral proceeding, the opportunity in which you could have introduced new facts in your case. If that person was ineffective, then we will allow you to raise these claims in federal court so long as you can show that guy was ineffective. And so that was really a big deal, right? Because
Mhm.
before then, you just didn't have any opportunity to raise new claims in federal habeas. Now, all of a sudden, you can raise new claims if you can show that you got ineffective assistance of counsel. So this was all,
Mm.
and I was handling a lot of death penalty work at the time. And this is the way that we could get investigators back on the case. We could really serve the third. We could present it to the federal court. They would review it. And we were really pretty happy about it. It wasn't easy to win, but at least you had a shot. So, what happened in this last term with a case called Shin v. Ramirez is they essentially said, we're not really going to talk about Martinez v. Ryan, but what we're saying is there's no mechanism for the federal court to actually hear that evidence. So, you don't get a
Oh,
hearing on it. The court's not going to take a look at any affidavits that you submit. A
Is this
lot.
like a limited jurisdiction thing because they're Article 3 courts, or what type of BS did they pull out of their frocks? And I guess they do call them robes. But it's interesting how, like, they're supposed to be the least political branch. And then you look at their rulings and their opinions and they go, it's like they just make it up. And they, if it
yeah.
suits their opinions that is political, they will create some type of coherence that they believe is consistent with other opinions.
It's true. This United States Supreme Court over the last few years now is very different than anything that we've seen in my lifetime.
Hmm.
Um,
Elizabeth, I gotta, my friend's case is federal, Lance, and you brought up the point that like you get a chance to represent. Has anybody ever won though, challenging the law itself to say, "Look, this is a bad law." Period. Right? I should. This shouldn't never even the investigations and whatnot that happen because compared to what's happening already in the rest of the United.
so if a federal judge isn't in the position to say, I'm just going to ignore the law. But when the higher courts, either the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court comes out and says something is wrong, then a district court has sort of the authority to go ahead and act in that space. And that's one thing that we're doing a lot of at our firm, for example. The United States Supreme Court came out with this new kind of Second Amendment rights case, New York State Pistol and Rifle Association versus Bruin, really giving more robust kind of meaning to the Second Amendment. We're using that to challenge federal inmates who are imprisoned on felon in possession of firearms challenges. We're trying to use what the United States Supreme Court is doing in order to get relief from our clients based on their new rulings. And let's just say, for example, we know so federal marijuana possession is illegal now. So does your guy
Please,
have an opportunity to file 2255 now? He may. Or if he can't do a 2255, he may have a compassionate release petition.
please speak again on the federal release petitions.
Yes. So if you've got a change, a subsequent change in the law that should impact somebody who is currently imprisoned, you may be able to file what's called a 2255 and ask that an inmate receive the benefit of that change in the law. Now, if it's one that has not been made retroactive to somebody who's currently housed, you still may be able to use what's called a compassionate release petition, where you raise that claim and see if you can get relief from the district court judge on that basis. And United States Supreme Court came out with a case last term called Concepcion that's really made it clear that subsequent changes in the law may be a basis upon which a district court can grant relief so long as they find extraordinary and compelling reasons to grant relief.
I'm
So
very
that's
excited about what Clarence Thomas has now almost said 2 years ago, last June, about how it's incoherent and it's half in, half out of a policy. And it's just more incoherent now. And every state, every day that goes by, every sale that happens, it becomes more and more incoherent. What challenge can we put before them where they're like, this law's crap? But it's so hard as like it is a regulation of commerce. That is completely
Mhm.
the purview of Congress to regulate.
Yeah.
But can they make like, what is the conceivable rational basis that they have to allow this to continue? They want the licensed manufacturers to pay more taxes?
It's just
That
weird. Okay. I was gonna say it's just weird how the Supreme Courts or higher courts don't want to be the ones that like create the law. We just enforce the law, but at the same time, they pick and choose things that are enforcing certain types of behavior that you're like that. So it really is up to them to say this is a good law or bad law. So why can't they
yeah.
acknowledge it? Why can't they say we need to change what we've been looking at? And when you mentioned earlier with the gun right comparison with that case, does this change any RICO cases? Because that's a lot of times trumped up with their stuff.
Just gotta go back to that point. Congress, right? They're the ones who make the law. And then you've got your president who gets to set the priorities, right? And so when the Biden administration does not want to prioritize enforcement for marijuana, his attorney general should take the lead there and then get his 94 district US attorneys to fall in line. And that's how all that kind of shakes out. For people who are doing time now with, just to say maybe their sentences were enhanced even based
Oh,
on
wow.
marijuana possession. Those are people who would also have some basis, I would think, to challenge what their current sentences are based on changes in the law in this area. So it's just something that inmates need to keep an eye on to see whether or not they would be a good candidate to raise a challenge. For people who are interested in raising those challenges, the rule of thumb, this is what I tell potential clients, is make sure that your institutional history is pretty clean. Make
Mm.
sure getting doing time in the Bureau of Prisons, that you're not getting any disciplinaries or anything like that, that you're taking advantage of any and all programming that may be available to you, and that you also do about 50% of your time. And then it's time to start looking at whether or not you may be eligible for one of these compassionate release petitions. And if you can put together a story to the court
Mm.
that show that you are entitled or deserving of some reduction in your sentence, you should go for it. I mean,
Isn't part of the
How much
problem though?
longer does
Okay.
Lance Glore have on his sentence?
3 more years. And then that's what I'm saying is, isn't part of the problem that, like, to get heard. So when I watched Lance, appeal, and I believe I heard somewhere in that was like, because I'm friends with his mom on Facebook and stuff, and so I'm aware of what's going on. And I thought they were saying that's the only time, that was the last time he was going to have an opportunity. Because isn't the issue also, even though you raise a question, if it gets heard, right? Like they don't have to hear you.
no, don't. But that's the appellate courts that we're talking about there. So he may have had his argument in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. That would be the last opportunity to really challenge legally that the underlying conviction. But a compassionate release petition is something different. And a 2255 is also different because if the law has changed from the time that his case was adjudicated in the Ninth Circuit, then the 2255 could be a mechanism for saying, look, the law has changed and I'm entitled to the benefit of that change.
Now, the 2255 is a statute like USC something USC 2255.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Fascinating. And it's federal. So if you're tuning in, it applies to you unless you're outside of the United States. But that's fantastic. And how do we also get syndicated in prisons? We should be brought to you and streaming in prison. How do inmates find out about the services which they need to know about? Is it
Yeah.
impossible to try to like market? I know how I try to market. It's almost impossible because I've been cannabis. How do you try to market services for people they can't get your communication? They don't see you on a billboard.
But actually, so the Bureau of Prisons is it's a closed system, right? So once people know about you, they know about you quickly. And I've done a couple of podcasts and now all of a sudden I've got clients up in New York and people just kind of know once you have a reputation for doing good work, they tell their friends about you and you get
Yeah.
phone calls from your family members. And in the Bureau of Prisons, they have a system called CoreLink.
Yep.
So guys can email, and I email with sort of a number of different guys who are in the Bureau of Prisons. And then when I see a case that I think is pretty important, I'll write up like a blurb about it and I'll send it out to them and get information.
I mean,
Because you're in the Bureau, it's not easy to get good, up to date information. And so for those of us who are on the outside who care about the guys on the inside, I feel a special responsibility to try to educate and let people know about what their options are.
yeah,
But it's been a really good way for me to make contact with people who are in there who I think we can help.
because prisoners do have a little intra network, an offline network. I've gotten letters as an activist. I told you, Elizabeth, that I don't have a I don't have a grow. I don't do any of this stuff. I just been trying to advocate for years, right? And so people eventually know who I am. And I've gotten letters and they're like, holy shit, that my address is out there. And so there's a network out there. And then, but the hard part is finding a lawyer who's right. People are lawyer ignorant because people, Tom gets hit up all the time. Like, hey, man, I got arrested or I'm going through this thing. And Tom's, yeah, I'm not that kind of lawyer.
Yeah.
And then,
I'm a C corp with a minority oppression issue. Oh, yes, go on.
but that's the thing, though. We have this, it's like how we view drugs. It's all one big blanket. No one understands how it really works or what it does. And when it comes to law, that's another part. And you doing the criminal side, but you're doing the side where, all right, you've already been found guilty, but now let's try and get you out. How come now, since post pandemic, wouldn't like the COVID just be like a sweeping, like compassionate release? Hey, because these guys are not living in resorts. They're not
Yeah.
hygiene, everything. Yeah.
So that's exactly right. So this new compassionate release petition, like it used to be, they had compassionate release petition, but like the warden had to file for it. And that just never happened. So it was with the First Step Act that allowed defendants to first, or inmates to file their own compassionate release petitions. This was brand new. And it happened to coincide at the same time that COVID pandemic just took
Oh,
off. And the first wave of cases of compassionate release cases that went through the federal courts were all COVID.
I imagine so.
And a number of those guys, not as many as should have, but a number of those guys got out, went home. We're beginning to see the recidivism numbers now,
Oh,
and they're low.
oh,
Well,
nice.
what you would expect. But the people who are getting granted compassionate release were older, so they had doubt of criminal activity. They were not in good health, and they're relatively disciplinary free. So they were guys who knew how to behave and control themselves, and so they got out, and everything's been fine. If anything, what it's shown us is that this over incarceral society
Yes.
we live in is not protecting us, and it's not really working.
But it
Uh,
is profiting a few select individuals. For example, you mentioned you're from South Carolina. Are there any privatized prisons in that state?
there are not. South Carolina we contract
Oh,
with them. We
oh,
contract with private prisons, South Dakota, in why can't Mississippi,
Mm.
and I think we've got something out in New Mexico as well.
So you guys are invested, but not any one local. Very, very
Yeah.
not my backyard of you there.
I don't think that the private prisons could compete with how low the wages are in South Carolina. I think that's probably it. I mean, we do everything so cheaply here, there really wouldn't be any savings.
But it's also not
come to South
justice.
Carolina, where we have prisoner wages, but you can go home at night if you can afford a home.
That's exactly right.
Oh my goodness. But it's still private prison's just the worst concept, right? Because now we're gonna try and encourage, like, the fact that you pay people because you don't have enough beds filling up in these poor guys in these places, it's ridiculous. Because now you're just
Well,
again more.
the whole
Yeah.
policy, the tough on
Well,
crime.
I'm going to take an unpopular sort of view
Sure.
here because I think private prisons, as currently constructed, I think are really problematic. And we all know that core civic is what it is. But the idea of somebody coming in and actually trying to rehabilitate or educate or otherwise service a prison population and can do so in a way that is more humane than what is currently happening is one that I would applaud. I think they get a bad rep because they're always trying to do it on the cheap. But what if you had somebody who could do it and could do it well and wasn't doing it on the cheap and you could actually get the state to pay for it? And the benefit would be that you would have people being released who could actually contribute to the economy more quickly, be educated, or we're prepared to do things that the state of South Carolina is not prepared to do. I don't have a problem with that.
But how would you structure it? That's the difficult thing. And then you have the money because they're paying for those prisoners. They're paying for those heads and beds, like through taxes or whatnot. If you could figure out, and then they're given a long sentence, a very long sentence. So they might be there for the rest of their duration.
The guys who are doing the really long sentences are still a pretty small portion of the guys who are doing sentences. Those people who are going in through our prison system are doing 5 years, 3 years, 4 years. And so let's just say it takes right now $38,000 a year to house a South Carolina inmate. If I had $38,000, I could get myself a social worker. I could do other things. I could get a case manager. I could get a number of things that could help bring somebody back into society, something other than putting somebody in a box. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's a lot of money. You could actually hire some people to do some good with that population instead of just putting them in the box.
You're
So that's
absolutely right on that.
that's
Yeah.
not cool for your violent criminal. You're gonna always have a reason to have a prison because you're gonna have violent crime. But
Yeah.
most something isn't violent. Most people who are going to prison are not violent criminals. And that is just this fallacy that I think many people just buy into, and it just doesn't reflect the reality of the situation.
I
I think
blame
it's because
Fox
they're
News.
criminals. No, Fox News. Chain gangs existed in prison long before the fairness doctrine was suspended, and then Fox News arose. And so I don't understand, though. It's one of those deals where we're so judgmental. Like, we don't want it to think about problems that are difficult. For example, cannabis legalization or
Yeah.
the appropriate policy goals that we should try to have with our criminal justice system.
Yeah.
And then we're puritanical. And so, like, we want people to be punished. You did something wrong. We have to punish you. So everybody get in the same hole. But then they're punishing all crimes the same way.
Well,
Unless you're
they're also inflicting a wound on the community. That's
Yeah.
the thing that about incarceration that I don't think people really recognize. It's like when you take somebody for their marijuana or their crack or whatever, and you put them in prison for 3 years, may not seem like a very long sentence to politicians, but that's 3 years when somebody's not contributing economically to that particular family unit, to
Yep.
that community. Not to mention that they're being disenfranchised, so they're not able to
Yeah.
vote, and you're just removing them from the fabric of society for what?
And
Right?
you're not really giving them any skills that will help them. You're giving
Right.
them maybe PTSD.
You certainly are. I
Yeah.
mean, that there is going to prison is traumatic. It is inflicting a trauma on a human being. And when
And
you're
their kids.
and they're
Yeah.
children, and we're doing it without thinking about, like, what's the benefit here? Are any of those
Exactly.
things safe? Are we safer when a crack addict is in prison?
But it's like, what's the point? Like when Lance got arrested, the evidence that was going through being displayed, there was pictures of they were collecting coats. It was winter. They were collecting coats and food drive, right? This is the kind of business he was running. And you took this guy away from his family and his daughter. She graduated high school and college since she's been in. And so, what's the point? What are you doing? What's it's not.
No. And here's the problem, right? No politician has ever lost his job or her job for being too hard on crime.
Ugh, so horrible.
But it is a, a common canard when somebody is too soft on crime. It is just the easiest attack somebody can make on a
Mhm.
politician. Sort of like you can't even really have the discussions that need to happen
Yeah.
about the cost benefit analysis and all the rest of it, because by the time, I mean, just opening your mouth to have the conversation, if you're a politician, is to lose your next election.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then the tough on crime, for whatever reason, and I think it's because the IQ at an average is about 100, is that you need to make sure that people are getting punished and cops are in the street. And so it's like all this safety and security, and you throw them away and you throw away the key as well. It's not about that punishment that we gave to that person. That made us actually more collectively in jeopardy and had to have crimes happen again. as opposed to that person committed this crime. Why? And then will they do it again? And is there a way that we can make sure that they won't do it again as quickly as possible? And like, how can you rehabilitate them? But if 50% of the population doesn't believe in rehabilitation, they
Right.
believe in punishment, then it may explain why it's always this tough on crime thing. And it's just because Joe Biden's the president and he wrote a lot of the tough on crime language in the 90s.
Yeah.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. And
And
he's cleaned
are
up
we any
again.
safer? Are we any safer now, 20 years, 30 years later?
No.
But I think to Elizabeth's point too, it's like most crime is it's just a buzzword. It's a scare tactic, right? We're not out there like cracking down on jaywalkers, like those horrible motherfuckers out there just crossing the street whenever they want. But I'm sure that's part of crime, though, right? You know what I mean? There's so many degrees. There's definitely psychos and bad people out there, but for the most part, it's just
Yeah, I've got
uh,
two guys that one who's currently a client and one who's a client a while back. They are both doing life sentences for less than 1 gram of crack cocaine.
oh my god.
And they were both addicts. They're
Oh,
both addicts. But
like
they
Is
that.
this
got
the three strike deal?
under recidivism statutes. Yeah, that's
Mm,
exactly right.
So instead of giving them treatment for a drug addiction, they took their whole life.
Yeah.
On the taxpayers paid for that person to go in a box until they're dead, instead of
38,000
fixing their
a
problem.
year. That's
Jesus.
right. That's
And
exactly
it,
right.
That's a
We
waste of money.
policy decision was made in this country to treat drugs as a criminal issue, as a crime issue, instead of like a public health issue.
yes.
So that was a decision that was made. And that's why we're seeing what we see. And if you want to talk about it, good luck, because the politician who's going to talk about this is going to lose his or her next election.
Yeah,
But
you could see the politicians' advertisement already. You'll see like prisoners going around on one of those revolving door spigots where they're just coming in and out of the prison at the same time, and they'll be playing ominous music in the background.
yeah, it's like a what do you call it? A perfect storm of shit because even though Biden was part of the predatory writing
Yeah.
legislation, we also gotta look at the Reagan. So for some reason, people like put Reagan on a pedestal and think this is an amazing like politician person who took away mental health care, right? All these, and then just say no. All these 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 ways of thinking are not beneficial to society or America, but yet they're going to put this guy on an altar and be like, "Oh no, he had great policies, trickle down." That really works. The- But it's both sides. But here's what happened: we tried, we cared at one point, and then somebody figured out a way to make money somewhere else. I It's very frustrating the policy side of things.
And when you look at sort of our incarceration rates, which back in the early 80s were about 300 to 500,000 people in prison in
Mm.
America. And now it's like 2.2 million.
Oh my god.
That's over 40 years, right? Where are we going to be in another 40 years?
Yeah.
And like our homicide rate's ridiculous. Our firearm homicide rate is just if you're looking at statistics and all these countries that are like, and then there's one country that's just way up here. That's like our firearm statistics. It's just a complete aberration of every other country that's out there. And you're like, and how many people do they have in prison? 2.5 million. Well, I guess this is a pretty good study that prisons don't make you any safer.
Seriously
Yeah.
though. There we go.
That's
We've proven
exactly,
that. Proven
that's
it.
exactly,
Oh my god.
But nobody, you can tell people that, but they'll just
No,
go
they'll spin
straight
it.
back to their lives, and
I mean,
nothing
that's
changes.
right. I mean, when you just look at it objectively, you can just see how ridiculous this all is, how we've gotten here.
Yeah.
And, and, but at the same time, it just seems like it's impossible to change it. And I think about this a lot. What does it take to change it? And other than just talking about it, I'm not sure. Because I sure hell I'm never going to run for office. Just it would be the worst job in face of the planet.
Use dollar for
Um,
dollars all day.
It
who wants? decent people really want to run for anything.
Yeah.
What's the guy,
Because
Santos? Is
Oh,
that
Jesus.
Santos out of there? The
I
way
don't
that
think
we have
that.
our system set up, that's what you're gonna get, because
Yeah.
only the people with that type of ideology think it's a good get.
Ye As disparaging as it feels and sounds, like, there is something about America and the process that is still self-sustaining because I, as an advocate, do get frustrated with, like you're saying, the policies and how to change it. But, what's frustrating is it's been easier to incarcerate somebody than it is to free them, right? To create this law that actually creates a proper justice, for lack of a better word. But we're also 21 states legal now in, what, 30 some odd states medical. The thing is, it's just like with January 6th. Like, it came that close to getting fucked. It came pretty damn close. But because a few portions of those cogs just didn't knock out,
Oh,
America stays America.
God
You
bless the federal employees. The good people that work for our country believe in it.
that's
We're
exactly
really fortunate to have that.
But
that's
that's all part of policy too. The thing is, I think in the early, like when prohibition happened, it was easier, right? America was smaller. It's like McConnell's a game master. Most people don't, he knows the procedure, the policies, the way to do things because there is a method. They don't teach you this. You don't learn it in school, like doing your taxes. You find
Well,
out
they also
fucking
don't
the
teach
hard
you
way.
that until you get to college, and then you have to major in accounting.
You got to go out of your way to learn shit and how to do the adult things here.
Do you know
But
how
like,
much an LLM in tax is? It's like probably now it's like closer to 100,000 depending on where you go. But I could have taken like another, I have no idea how long an LLM is, if it's another 2 years or another 3 years. It's 2 more years? Yeah,
at
I
least.
could have gotten an LLM, which is just another distinction, like,
mhm,
completely in federal tax law.
sure.
I would have been even more in debt when I was done.
Oh
But you
yeah.
also would have been secured in a process where, like, people had to come to you to figure out, like
Sort
even a
of.
280E for most people like me, I hate this fucking subtract 1 from A7. This is the paper they give me. All I wanna do is give you the paper that they give me too. I don't have to do math for you. We have the numbers. We don't we have the technology. I don't have to do all this work. But you don't
Yeah,
we're still
it
catching up with the goddamn
requires Congress to vote for something.
common sense.
Good luck.
But we also are better off than we were. That's the whole point though. Like, when I was a kid, compared I live in a state, I got a bunch of weed here, I got a beer here,
Yeah.
and I'm not fearing the cops. I'll drive with weed in my car, I get past, I don't care. I fucking wave to them because that's my
Not where
America.
she's at.
Yeah,
She's in South Carolina.
that's
Ask
what
me
I
like,
was
I
I
how's
was
was
the
thinking we don't do that here.
yeah. We're in Illinois. We make sure that you have it in an odor-proof, child-resistant
Right.
container, and then you have to throw it in your console, and you can't have access to it. It's sensible.
So
yeah,
it seems like how police officers are able to search your car. I mean, here it's
Mm.
like I
No
remember
probable cause anymore.
no probable
No
cause.
probable cause.
and then Tom can tell you here in Seattle Hempfest, before pandemic, when the world was awesome, cops would hang out and you'd be smoking right next to a cop because priorities of what is bad and wrong at the moment take place, and not a bunch of dirty hippies join a little clan.
Prosecution for cannabis is having a real hard time now as and this is the thing, I don't have the container on me, but the most recent trip to the dispensary that I made when I visited my client dispensary that opened, I bought some weed. I can't remember exactly what it was, but the percentages were on the back, and it will break down THCA from THC. And so the THCA was about 25%, let's say. The THC was 0.01. So that stuff was legally, federally hemp. And if I would
Nice.
have gotten stopped with it at all, I would have used as evidence to exculpate
Mm.
myself from any criminal liability, even if I was in South Carolina. No, Johanna, this was tested. They were required to test it pursuant to their license. Call
Mm.
Mm, that's
them. But
awesome.
it it isn't. And then all the tests that they use, and the cops or the prosecutors are putting forward their evidence for what is convicting them for that possession or that whatever. They test for metabolites. The only thing that the statute says is Delta 9, not the metabolites. But it's not the stuff that I do. People will call just because if you say you're a cannabis lawyer, they'll
Yeah.
assume that it is criminal, but I just refer out.
So this is working in federal appeals. Have you dealt with any cannabis cases or
So I just depends on what part of the country you're in where you get certain kinds of cases. And frankly, here in South Carolina, we are all about the fentanyl right now, huge priority here before heroin and opioids. We
yeah,
had the crack cocaine and methamphetamine. So I don't really see marijuana cases here.
damn.
And I,
Is that because there's not consumption as much or just the law enforcement priorities like, hey, sorry, potheads, we gotta go deal with these guys over here with the
I think it's law
pills.
enforcement priorities. And we've had series of U.S. attorneys who have tried to prioritize violent gangs. We do
Yeah.
have some gang issues here, and it's still a small district. So, like Southern District of New York can prioritize white collar crimes and all the rest of that. We are a gang.
And that's why if you're gonna be committing white collar crimes, pick the South, where they don't have any ability to understand what you're
It's
frauding.
true.
Yeah, and so like Bernie Madoff with the split strike strategy, if he would have been in Nebraska, still be a free man.
That's probably true. That
And
is probably
and that's why I will be doing what I do in Illinois. No, I'm kidding. Try to be compliant in all things,
Yeah.
except for the federal cannabis laws, but that's because
true.
they're silly.
But there is a little piece of cannabis news out of South Carolina, and this just happened last week. So maybe you guys can look at the newspapers. Friend of mine, he's a lawyer in Florence, South Carolina. This was his case, but he had a client where he was growing hemp. So you
Oh
are like
yeah.
Carolina. And so our South Carolina law enforcement division came through and destroyed his crops because they
Mm,
said it was marijuana. And apparently he just got a judgment for $11,000
nice.
for
Well,
having properly destroyed it.
I thought that case though, it wasn't because they said it was marijuana, but because he relocated the grow. And then they were like, well, you
Oh,
didn't file the fucking paperwork. And he's like, I tried filing the paperwork. And they're like, no, you didn't. Well, we're gonna kill your shit now.
And what may be it, I
No,
that's
yeah,
the that is the prejudice
closely, but
towards this flower. That is the
yeah,
prejudice towards this horticultural crop. That's it. It's not like we're talking about fentanyl. You're talking about a horticultural crop. If you don't like the flower, don't smell it. But they have to feel like they arrest you because they're just so conditioned for it. They've known this for so long. It has been that they and you read their objections to when they try to legalize it. They go, "We need that. We need that probable cause. Do you have any idea how many other crimes we found because of that?" It's like, oh, great. So if we just have an excuse to search you, whether that excuse is warranted or not, do you have any
right.
idea how many more crimes you
to that point, though, I think because cannabis is so common to the American person, you're just giving a pass to search anybody. That's what that pass is.
And that's exactly right. That's how it is here. If
Mm,
you want to search that car, you walk by, and if you smell it emanating from the car, you've got probable cause to search it. And
so wrong. Yeah, just wrong thinking.
well, it's crazy though, is like when they say that this is the probable cause to search, and then you're like, did you get any marijuana doing it? There's never any marijuana in the car.
I found a gun.
Yep. And it just
Almost
goes
smell like
against
marijuana.
everything. Goes against
Yeah.
everything that the country was founded on and being able to be let alone. That's why we're
Right.
here, and that's why a lot of people move west. Maybe that's
Yes.
why cannabis legalization started out west. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So, Elizabeth, what about your practice? Like, how come you gravitate? I know why I got into what I got into, financial and corporate stuff and some litigation, but why did you gravitate toward criminal legal appeals?
It's like when I went off to law school, initially I thought I was going to be a prosecutor. I just didn't want to be on the sidelines. I just wanted to do fun and interesting sort of work. But I really thought I'd be a prosecutor. So my first year in law school, I ended up with an externship at the Wyoming Public Defender's Office. and I just loved it. It fit like a glove. It was just perfect. And my background's in philosophy, and so I've always been a reader writer, and just gravitated to the legal argument space, and it's worked. It's been really a good. It's been a great career for me. I know it's not. There are a lot of very unhappy lawyers, but I think whenever you can create on behalf of other people, and you can stand up and represent people who historically don't have a voice, it's a good day. And
Nice.
I've always felt just really privileged to be able to walk into courtrooms and other people against just the power of the state or power of the government.
Yeah, and that's so very important for any because I get a lot of law school people like, "Hey, can I be your intern on?" All right. If you're watching and you're in law, whether you're a lawyer or a law student, that's very important because when you come out of law school, you're gonna have a lot of debt and you're gonna want as much money as possible. And then you're gonna find out that you're a hamster on a wheel. And there is
Yeah.
no stopping of that wheel, by the way. Every month, I don't know if your hourly quota is 160 or 200, but that is your hourly quota that month and the next month and the next month. And if you do that for a few years, maybe you'll move up. But you know what you don't have? You don't have clients because you've been working the whole time. So
Right.
but then you do get your skills, you get your chops. And so I was on that wheel too, but I didn't pay my student loans off with it. I had to start my own business to do that.
Yep. Same here. I I did public defender work. I did death penalty work. I started my own firm about 3 years ago. Now I'm paying off my loans. I've been making payments, but I also went to the University of Wyoming where I did not get an extortionate amounts of debt. I really there are a lot of kids who are coming out these days with like 200 grand. I'm like, good God.
Yeah, mine was about 150 and 130 to 150. I can't remember exactly 15 years ago. But yeah, and then you're a W-2. And so you're going to get a cash flow that is the worst cash flow when it comes to tax consequences.
Mhm.
Uh, and then you're going to and you don't have any chops yet. And so you got to really pay your dues for several years as you learn all this crazy cockamamie thing that is legal procedure and practice and litigation. If you can find what you really enjoy, then you'll be good because you're gonna be doing this for, like, decades, bro.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean
And how do you want to do it? I've enjoyed criminal defense work, but I never really liked doing the trial stuff. So now I do appellate work, and I didn't really like going to an office. So now
mhm,
I don't.
yeah.
So just being able to figure it out and be intentional with how you want your life to be.
You're like on the second chance side of things. The fact that you're trying to help a guy with 1 gram of crack. It's just all about the process. Like that's why I talk with Tom about the business side of things because he's a previous banking lawyer, so he has that experience and knowledge base, which translates over. No, not criminal law, not this guy. I wouldn't go to him if I got in trouble.
No. And the banking was fine, but then when you're representing banks and you're interviewing and I guess deposing or, like, examining on the witness stand debtors, it is not fun because 'cause they're lying and they're sweating and they're red and they're, very confused. And you're just like, "This is my job, taking rich people's money." They're banks, but still, it's rich people.
I mean,
They're
this is
rich.
why, yeah, criminal defense. Like, never. People were like, "How do you represent those guys?" And those guys guilty. How do you do that? I'm like, I have never had a day where I wasn't at least proud of what I was doing. I may not like my client, I may not like a judge, I may not like whatever, but I always felt like I was on the right side. I'm not kicking people out of their homes. I'm not keeping people from getting their insurance payouts or whatever. I've always just felt like I've been on the right side. And that's not something whole lot of attorneys can say either,
Well,
frankly.
especially considering when you see the main purchasers of legal products, insurance companies and banks,
Yeah.
maybe pharmaceutical companies, maybe out east, you have a lot of, family corporations or publicly traded corporations, but when you get to the publicly traded corporation money, you have a fleet of lawyers in-house.
Environmental polluters. They spend a lot on lawyers.
Environmental polluters, and so you could also just be, like, killing the planet. "Hey, my plastic company client is awesome. I don't know what you're talking about. those trash pandas that you mentioned in the oceans. No, that plastic island was always there.
That's right.
That's hysterical.
It's
Hey,
true. You look at the cash flows of where legal dollars get spent and who's the
Yep.
buyer of it. And then if you're in an industry and you're talking about total addressable market size, what are you doing? You're like, oh, we should market to these people. Why? Because they buy our services.
we're just talking about people with deep pockets with influence. We have that in cannabis too. True Leaf. Just
Yeah. Cannabis is a good small business cash flow opportunity for America. And if they do it right, but then it's not free. And when it doesn't scale particularly well. So when you see all
Mhm.
these big cannabis MSOs, they're very similar if you look at their balance sheets and their stock charts, down to the right. And it's not something you really want to be in. But then if you look at cash flows of smaller organizations that will put out a quality craft product, and more like a craft beer industry, you can have it. It's just that people, they get one, they want two. Now I want five. Now I want 10. And so like this greed or like clamoring for more and more, uh, that doesn't work to a certain extent in the cannabis industry. It'll work to a point, maybe not beyond that, which is good though, because then you can have a good industry. But I hope that South Carolina gets it one day.
yeah.
They
We,
will.
yeah, we've got a legislator out of Beaufort County who's been working really hard to get us some medical marijuana. So
Is Representative Mace quite popular in the state? Or
no, no. And if her district hadn't been so highly gerrymandered, she would not have won.
Oh wow.
yeah, the
Yeah.
gerrymandering we have too. Like there are seats that like I'm not sure how I'm going to do this, but I'll figure out a way later. I'm going to come back as Jesus H. Christ, like descend from heaven and take up a residence in this particular congressional district. And explain to everybody I'm a hippie, I'm a liberal, I'm a pot smoker, I'm a vegetarian, do yoga all the time, but I'm Jesus H. Christ. I'm your savior, so you should vote for me. I would lose because I would run as a Democrat, and I would lose by 70% because that's how gerrymandered a lot of these congressional districts are. We really get it's ridiculous. The people are not picking their elected officials. The
Yeah.
elected officials are picking their voters
God.
to secure their seats.
For
So
real.
we had Joe Cunningham who won that particular district down by the coast. And then from the time that Joe, when he came into office, they like changed the districts. And then Nancy Mace like ran against him or yeah. Yeah, I guess that's right. And then she came in, and so it all just flipped. And then now that is a pretty solidly like red district, even though it hadn't been in the very recent past.
Wow.
And the reason why she's coming across as being reasonable and things these days is because she's got a swing district. It's not, it's, it was a Joe Cunningham district not that long ago. And so she realizes she needs to be reasonable if she's going to keep the seat. But I mean, she's another politician who just checks the wind.
Yep, that's what
Yeah.
they do.
Just say whatever is.
Young too, right? She's a younger up and coming. Yeah. We'll hear more shit later.
Yeah. But Elizabeth,
But
I really
yeah.
appreciate you coming on the podcast 420 somewhere where we talk to people about aspects of the industry. And it's a wonderful service that attorneys like you provide. How can people find you online?
I've got a website. It's just elizabethfranklinbest.com. So find us there, give our office a call, and if there's anything we can help anyone with, be happy to do it. But yeah, we are firmly in the post conviction space. So if you are due in time, then, we're probably somebody who you can talk to. And if we can't help you, we'll be able to help you find somebody who can.
Right
Well, that's
on.
fantastic. I really do appreciate it. And if somebody out there wants to come on 420 somewhere, please do get in touch with us. And now, whatever you don't leave YouTube. Watch the next video for
Over
5
there.
minutes. I don't care if you have to brush your teeth or what you're going to do. Just don't leave it because that will help us out slightly on the algorithm. See you
Take
next
a
time, everybody.